We're here this morning to release a community-developed call to action that is being crafted by a network of organizations, community members, and First Voice people and their allies as a blueprint to overhaul the income assistance program here in Nova Scotia. I'm Fiona Traynor. I'm going to be the first speaker. I'm a community legal worker here at Bell Legal Aid, and I also work with other community groups on poverty-related issues.
I'm Megan McBride. I'm the social worker at the North End Community Health Center, just up the street here.
And I'm Christine Sonnier. I'm the Nova Scotia Director of the Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives.
My name is Elizabeth Goodrich. I'm a member of the Benefits Reform Action Group, and I'm a First Voice stakeholder in crafting this document.
Great, thanks. And each of us are going to be speaking about different aspects of our community agenda. So I'm just going to give just a brief overview of why we're here and why we developed this agenda. And I want everybody to pick up a copy of a press release and the actual document for your review, because that'll give a lot more detail about what we're proposing. But you have to understand that this has been a process of around 2 months of hard work, people working together, coming around the table, being open, and being honest with each other about how this program needs to change. We've reached out to other community groups around the province, and we've gotten support from 17 organizations and individuals who support this document wholeheartedly and this movement. So as a united group, we recognize that over the past 3 years, the government has been working on changing the social assistance system here in Nova Scotia. But we are here today to advise the government that First Voice people and community groups, including women's and family centers across this province, mental health providers, health professionals, lawyers, and activists are not satisfied with the process to date. We've listened to the government and have sat around tables with staff from the Department of Community Services. And they have told us that they want to work collaboratively with community members on the reform of the program. In fact, just yesterday, the government made an announcement about a change to the income assistance program. You probably have heard about it. And I sat in that press conference, and I heard the Minister of Community Services, Kelly Regan, assert that she encourages collaboration with community. And I would say that this is great news, and that we thank her for the invitation to work with her and her staff. So in this climate of government and community collaboration, our network has given the government our community agenda for social assistance, adequacy, and reform. This document, you'll find it over there, outlines what we think is a meaningful collaborative process to reform the social assistance program. This includes conducting a 6-month formal consultation with a working group of members jointly identified by community and government, including First Voice and service providers. It also includes developing an effective and transparent design of the program using a lens inclusive of human rights, social determinants of health, and gender and rural communities. Throughout this process, it will be vitally important that participants in the working group are supported, and therefore the barriers that may prevent them from collaborating must be removed. Barriers could include travel costs, childcare, stipend for First Voice persons, and other types of barriers like that. Also, we are calling for the establishment of procedural fairness through adequate policies and procedures, and this also should be done in a transparent collaboration to develop new legislation and policies to govern the program. It's imperative that fundamental accountability be built into this and further development of the program. And that's why this network of groups is calling for the publication of a transparent annual report that will outline the progress of this agenda, and also that the report be vetted by a third-party body that will provide their comments to Cabinet, and that it be tabled in the legislature. And I'll just end by saying the time is now to work collaboratively to reform the social assistance program in this province. It's necessary, and it can't wait any longer. Thanks very much.
So I'm going to give you a few facts and really bring home why it is that the only true way to begin to address systematic oppression and really uphold human rights within the social assistance system is to begin with an immediate increase in the amount of support provided and to plan for substantial investments to bring those rates high enough to cover the essentials. It needs to be done over a fairly short time frame. And here's why. The amount of basic social assistance provided by the Department of Community Services amounts to $575 per month. That's total. That includes a personal allowance amount of $275 per month, which is to cover food, clothing, and everything else. It also provides a shelter amount up to a maximum of $300 for an individual for a rental. Now, you can get up to $535 if you are a person with disability, if you're 55, if you're feeling abuse, if you're age 16 to 18, if the government deems that you somehow have a special need, then maybe you'll get up to a maximum of $535. Again, $575 a month for everything. Measuring adequacy by comparing the total amount of welfare income to any poverty measure shows that this amount is absolutely inadequate for any household type. For example, the largest gap, so if you take the market basket measure, which is a measure of poverty, and you compare that to the household type called a single individual, that amount provided, so the total welfare income, even if you include the affordable living tax credit, the poverty reduction credit, the GST credit, total welfare income, so everything that anybody can access except if they have a special need and make a case to government with all of the paperwork required. So total welfare income. It amounts to not even 40% of the market basket measure. Not even 40% of what Statistics Canada tells us is required to meet your basic needs. That means for that individual, it would actually require an additional $11,000 a year to cover what is needed for essentials. And it doesn't matter what household you're looking at. The amounts are astounding. Even for the household where we've seen additional support through Canada Child Benefit, we are still looking at gaps that is near $9,000 a year. So the Canada Child Benefit is going to lift some families out of poverty, but certainly not many. And so when we look at what's happening in terms of the social assistance rates, and we think about our community just for a minute, we have seen only a $20 increase in the personal allowance, and that was a few years ago. So let me put that into perspective. Inflation is a real thing. Prices go up. It means it's harder to afford things. Even if we look at, and of course, if you think about that shelter amount, how easy is it to find a rental in our community at $300 a month? It is not. It is almost impossible. So the rental amounts have increased 17% between 2001 and 16. So no real increase there. That means that's been eroded by at least that much. And of course, the shelter allowance is already below what you need. By design, let me repeat that. By design, income assistance is forcing people to pay over 50% of their income on rent. According to the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, this means they are in extreme core housing need. Someone is considered in core housing need if they spend more than 30% of their total income on shelter. The lower the household income, obviously the more onerous it is for them to meet those expenses. People need to be able to afford stable, permanent, appropriate housing. They also need to eat and cover their basic needs. Shelter costs are inflexible. You have to pay them or you are without a house or you're without power. When the food budget is the only flexible money, one is often used for the other. As the food costing report out of Mount St. Vincent concluded in its most recent report, income assistance is not sufficient for households to be able to afford a basic nutritious diet. The $20 a month increase certainly would not cover the increased cost of a nutritious diet, which rose in just 3 years more than $84 a month. The amount of income provided must be adequate. It must be combined with supports and services to allow people to have control over decisions and not have to experience constant stress about making ends meet every month.
Good morning, everyone. As a social worker at the North End Community Health Centre, I see daily how poverty impacts on people's health. The Canadian Medical Association tells us that only 15% of our sickness or wellness comes from our biology. The other 85% is made up of factors in your life, including poverty, including housing, the quality of care you receive, and the environment you live in. Not only is poverty an indicator of good or poor health, but it impacts all of the other things that are part of someone's life. Furthermore, we also know that race and gender also greatly impact access to health services, the ability to get equitable services, and follow-up care. Using the human rights framework that we've talked about in our call to action, for social assistance is therefore integral to ensuring that community members relying on social assistance are able to access the things that they need to reach the same level of health that is accessible to others in the community. The ESIA program has released numbers that report that 70% of their caseload is living with a disability. So this further shows that this human rights framework is incredibly important. We've also talked in this document about a proper appeals process, and this is absolutely necessary because people need adequate things to achieve necessary and life-saving health devices and funding. So this could include pharmacare, it could include medical transportation, or it could include assistive devices. The social determinants of health, which is the framework that we use at the North End Clinic, also shows us that other factors are related to income that directly impact health. The ability to pay for safe housing, for electricity, and for basic food are also things that poverty forces people in our community to make the choice between. The current overall low rates mean that people living on social assistance have no capacity to focus on their health. When faced with the choice to keep the power on or to buy bus tickets to a medical appointment, the reality is that this is no choice. Seeing a dietitian and getting counseling for chronic issues such as diabetes or heart disease, getting assessed for a sleep apnea machine, or buying the preparation solution for a colonoscopy. These things have become a luxury for folks who are on income assistance, and they must reach out to charities and local community groups to meet these incredibly important basic needs in a healthcare system that I think every Nova Scotian will agree is struggling. Raising the rates is incredibly important for the folks that are living in our community, for folks who are living with disabilities, and for families who are trying to make a step forward when it comes to focusing on life other than just the work that happens when you are poor.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming out, for taking the time to listen to us, to hopefully help spread the word about this very important document, this important call to action. It's startling for us to remember that it's been 27 years since the 1989 resolution to end child poverty in Canada by the year 2000. So we didn't do that 17 years ago, and we're hopefully working towards it now, but very slowly. I think that we can see from the latest child poverty report card that has come out in the last few weeks, that there has been a steady, over the years, erosion of public services and income supports rather than the much needed public investment. This is very troubling. Right now we have a provincial government, the Department of Community Services, that's been in the midst of a transformation of the system, of its policies and services for several years, and the rates of income assistance have been left stagnant. So as we've been trying to describe the life of somebody who's on income assistance, it's really a matter of daily struggle to survive. There is no planning for the future. There's no considering whether you should be going back to school or not. You're really just trying to keep your head above water. If you have children, then also, constant worries about their survival too. So what this means is, what this tells me is that what we have in our government, in our Department of Community Services, are politicians and bureaucrats that, however well-intentioned they may be, that they are vastly out of touch with the realities of the thousands and thousands of people in this province who are living in poverty, the most vulnerable amongst us. So if people were struggling to get by before, so if we're just looking in the last 3 years of this, since this transformation has begun, it seems like everything's on hold until this transformation's unrolled. So they're talking about 2019, 2020 for this transformation. So that's still a long ways to go when you're having trouble keeping the fridge full of food. Many of the people who live on income assistance find that the system is very demoralizing, very dehumanizing. It forces people into social isolation, and it really, really affects a person's physical and mental health. It means living in survival mode constantly. It's dehumanizing to navigate a community that is completely uninformed of the reality of living day in and day out in survival mode, and then dealing also with the myths that abound about people who live on income assistance, that it's some kind of free ride, and that there's only certain types of people who can fall into poverty, and of course we know that anybody can fall into poverty. The other thing about how out of touch the government seems to be on this issue is that, well, not only are they out of touch, but what we're not doing is complying to our human rights obligations that Canada has signed on to, various conventions, the rights of the child, the rights to cultural, the economic, social, and cultural rights, rights of Indigenous people, and so all of this process that we have existing right now is really in contravention of those human rights. And so that's a lot of what we want to deal with in this document, that a new system should be crafted within the framework of human rights. So the program falls short of its responsibility to provide adequate income support to meet people's most basic of needs. By offloading this responsibility to community organizations, the government allows people to be forced to rely on charities to help with the essentials for survival. The result is that many of these needs are going unmet. By neglecting to provide adequate support, the Department of Community Service also unloads its responsibility to other government departments, like healthcare, mental health care. Given the suffering endured by people because of the vastly inadequate assistance, there's a real urgency to increase the rates as soon as possible, which would be reflected in the next budget for 2018-2019.
And thanks again, everyone, for coming and showing some support for this community agenda. Really important that we see people here in the audience who are supportive. And as we move forward on this, just to let people know, the community groups who support this agenda have asked the government to respond by January 15. 15th, 2018. And if you're interested in knowing how they respond, I'll be in touch. So thanks again, everybody.